As we've heard from the custodian of the two holy mosques, and we read the statement of the Crown Prince, the government is very keen on giving the health of the homeland and the citizens the top priority, top support, economic support, enablement of the private sector, and allowing the private sector to invest more in the national economy, supporting the private sector through the government, not only through the expenditure, but through the development fund, the National Development Fund, and the PIF, in order to create greater opportunities of employment and investment opportunities as well for entrepreneurs, to empower the citizens to work and to benefit from the government quality services, God willing. At the outset, it might be convenient to speak about what happened in 2020. And of course, this year we said it was an exceptional year by all standards. 2020, we started it very strongly. The Vision 2030 of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was about 4 years ago, and it achieved great goals and objectives on the fiscal level. We were able, over the past 4 years, to achieve a strong financial control. We lowered the deficit to 9 to 5%, and then 2020 came together with this corona COVID-19 pandemic, with which the government of the custodian of the two holy mosques worked and dealt with it very professionally in all standards, not by the testimony of our government, but by the testimony of our citizens, whom we have seen great cooperation with all the precautionary measures and all the austere measures that the government had to take in order to contain the pandemic, their acceptance to all the very tough decisions made by the government. I would like to thank all the citizens, and I would like to thank them for their understanding, and all those who were working either in the health sector, who gave all their best in time or effort, but their lives, they put it to the forefront in order to deal with this pandemic. I would like to thank all the security officers and personnel who worked extremely hard and worked in full collaboration to control and contain the pandemic and maintain the security. And I will never forget, at the beginning and at the end, at any time, to thank all our army personnel at the Southern Front, who are not saving any effort or life in order to maintain these peace and security and stability of this homeland. We will continue to pray for them and thank them all our lives. The year 2020, we witnessed exceptional outcomes for how the government had dealt with this pandemic. The government, at the very beginning, from day one, worked at extreme harmony, at extreme collaboration and coordination, and also very firmly and very strongly took very firm and very quick decisions to deal with the pandemic and contain it and give the top priority for health, to deal, to treat the patients, to enhance the capacities of the health sector. And we've seen great leaps forward in the preparedness of the health sector that usually take years in order to be fulfilled or achieved. From the beginning of the crisis, a Supreme Committee headed by the Crown Prince, where the Crown Prince was very clear in the beginning that we have to make sure that we can contain this pandemic, we can control it. He provided all the capabilities. He never saved an effort in order to maintain human lives and the health of the citizens and the residents also in this homeland. We were working collaboratively and harmoniously in the health sector and also in the economic sector, where the government greatly supported the national economy, the private sector, maintained job security, maintained jobs in the private sector very clearly and very effectively. It focused its efforts very clearly on the most prone sectors, and also took the brave decisions at the same time in order, in light of this pandemic, when we stabilized the situation and we could contain it. The decision was taken in order to reopen the economy gradually and had a very positive impact on the recovery of the economy and regaining the economic activity in mostly. And of course, we can say that the pandemic is still around. We are still seeing some sectors that are still suffering, such as the aviation, such as tourism. However, most economic factors and most economic sectors have started the recovery process. We also witnessed efforts, great efforts, in fact, by the private sector, by the public sector as well, and the government in their quick interaction and in order to invest all the achievements and investments that took place over the past 3 or 4 years since the beginning of or the launch of Vision 2030, as if we were prepared for such a pandemic. And we've invested in the digital infrastructure, we invested in the government transformation and our capability to take quick, effective actions and decisions. We invested in the health sector, in fintech, and we also reaped the harvested the positive outcomes in the wake of this pandemic. You can probably see now some figures where that started the year, the promising sectors that where the government invested over the past 3-4 years, were witnessing positive and strong growth. Some were negatively growing, which was reflected into a positive growth. These investments in the past 4 years enabled the economy to deal with the shock, to absorb the shock, enormous shock, in fact, of the pandemic at one level, and also from the decreased oil prices and the lower income of the government. But thank God we were able to take all this shock very courageously and effectively. Over the past 4 years, we also, the legislative reforms and enabled entrepreneurship and our capability in the economy during the pandemic to absorb the shock and deal with it with efficiency. In 2020, there was a clarity for the government that health comes first, and to be prepared to deal with the pandemic from the beginning. And even before we registered any cases, we took decisions, brave decisions, in fact, that were not taken in the history of the kingdom. Historically, we never stopped Umrah, for example. We never stopped prayers in mosques, but that was a necessity, brave, firm necessity that contributed greatly in the containment and the control of the pandemic. The government financed greatly all the needs of the health sector. We directed expenditure in the sectors which we could reduce expenditure because of the pandemic, such as travel, and also in activities and functions in the sports sector that had great finances. We reshifted the focus of these resources into the health sector, and in addition, we spent more than the allocated budget. That was $1.023 trillion. We completed this year with an expenditure of $1.068 trillion to make sure that we provide all the support, not only for the health sector and for the citizens to protect jobs and employment, but also for the private sector, either in the exemptions which were given or the deferment of certain incomes such as taxes, zakat, or the financial return, which, thank God, proved our capability in the kingdom, not by our own testimony, but by global testimony, and the that we were able to emerge strongly. Of course, the initiatives of we launched a number of initiatives that helped the private sector to deal with the pandemic at the same time and in the same year, where we had to deal with two major shocks, which is the pandemic and the oil prices that fell down. The kingdom was also hosting the G20, which is the largest economic global gathering, which we were able to capably and successfully organize here, not only to benefit from the lessons of the G20 in the economy of the kingdom, but also the world has also benefited from our leadership of the G20 in 2020. We came with important initiatives that enabled the whole world to recover and to put a minimum level for the economic shrinkage, and to recover the global economy. We were able, through the G20, to support research, finance the pharmaceutical research, and even vaccines by supporting the G20 in order to fill the gap in the health sector. Finally, and we were able at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to maintain our economy and the world economy at the same time by managing the oil crisis that took place in 2020. We dealt with it very responsibly, effectively through the OPEC and the OPEC Plus in order to regain balance in the energy markets. You could probably notice here a very simple comparison, and I've been asked about this before. Why did the government spend in the incentivization packages about 3.1% of the total GDP on incentives compared to 9% that were spent by most countries in the world? My answer is that the quantity is not important, but the quality, and it is the how that most importantly matters. We focused these incentives on the most prone sectors, which were, by incentivizing them, we can regain their activity. The outcome is that even though we spent about a third of what the world spent, however, the economic recession in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is the smallest compared by the 5 top countries in the G20, as we can see here in this slide. So the impact of the incentives which were launched by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was more effective, more than countries that spent more on such initiatives. In relation to the economic indices for 2020, we can see here on the and the chart, which is very expressive. This speaks about the confidence, which is a global index globally. We can see the green line, where the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was one of the least countries in terms of the recession of confidence of procurement managers compared to advanced countries such as we were among the best. When we rebounced and we went back after the lockdown and reopened the economy, we saw a very positive bounce back in the data of last month, with an index of the purchasing power that increased up to 54.7%, which is the highest index since January and one of the best in the world. Other indices, as we have seen, a great recovery and in the employment of Saudis as well for the third quarter compared to the start of this year. We saw the exports, non-oil exports, rebounding positively, beautifully in November is the highest, as we can see, compared even to the same month last year in the same period. We also saw a very healthy rebound in the sales, or the points of sales purchases healthily improved compared to the same period of the same year that registered about over 30% increase. And at the end, the banking increased by, compared to the same period of last year, either for companies or individuals or for the real estate loans. As far as the financial data is concerned, as in the preliminary statement, the same estimations in this year. The expenditures will be about $1,068 billion. The reason of increased expenditure in the budget is the pandemic and the government's decision to support the private sector, and before that, supporting the health sector, which has to allow us to deal with the pandemic or any other second waves where the health sector needs to be capable and strong, so we don't have to relock the economy again. Despite all the challenges related to the government revenues, however, we were able, by employing our investments of billions over the past 3 or 4 years in technology, the government was able, through the Atimad platform, to deal with all the expenditure orders automatically and at a distance, and to send all these payments to the banks of the private sector and other agencies. We were able to pay the dues of the private sector up to last week by 98% in less than 45 days period, by about 70%, of 67% to be more specific, in 15 days. Why did we do that quickly? Because during the pandemic, we wanted the private sector to have the enough and full liquidity in order to finance their operations and pay their salaries. With regards to the revenues, we're going to close with 670 billion, with a lower than expectations because of the lower energy revenues. As for the deficit for this year, is going to be about 12% of the total GDP, with about 298 billion. We expect to finish the year with an inflation of 3.7%, and then to go back to stabilize at 2.9 and then 2% in the next year, which is an excellent rate that supports the economic growth. In general, I believe, as we have seen over the third and fourth quarters of a rebound and recovery, is very promising. And God willing, we're going to see an economic growth next year of not 2%, which is going to increase in 2020 and 2023. Regarding the budget of 2021, let me start with the most important indices, economic indices. As for the general finance, the government is going to continue to control expenditure and improve its efficiency. And here I want to speak about something extremely important. In 2017, when we laid out our strategy of expenditure efficiency, we wanted to provide 220 billion of the expenditures of the government between 2017 and 2019. I can say now that before the end of 2020, that 3 years before the deadline, we were able to achieve that in collaboration with all government agencies to save over 350 billion by increasing our efficiency of expenditure, increasing without hurting our quality, and to do our expenditure without any excesses. This is a great achievement we will maintain and sustain over the following years. In fact, our trend in our strategy, and in order to increase the participation of the private sector, we will continue to support the private sector in order to invest in the economy. We will enable and empower the private sector through the development funds led by the National Development Fund. We will enable the private sector through initiatives of privatization. Through the pandemic and during this very difficult year, not only for the government, but also for the people, for the citizens, for the private sector, investors as well, we witnessed in 2020 investments through the privatization initiatives by the private sector in the kingdom, over 15 billion reals, and we expect that 2021 to double this investment to reach up to 30 or above 30 billion reals. We will continue, God willing, to spend on the vision realization programs. A number of programs have achieved their objectives and seen great leaps. For example, in the housing program, we witnessed exceptional leaps in the PIF, and which is a cornerstone of the national economy that achieved a number of objectives before the end of 2020. We also witnessed the financial sector development program that achieved its goals that were expected before. We were able to achieve them before the end of the year in 2020 in fintech, in the great improvements in the National Transformation Program. We continued to spend on these programs, and we will continue at the same time for the next few years, for the next years as well. Also for the major mega projects, the government is committed to improve and enhance its economic foundation, not only by increasing the quality of life, but diversifying the economy, investment opportunities, and increasing greater employment opportunities for the citizens. The National Development Fund was formed about 2 years ago. It started to play its role effectively in facilitating the role of the development funds and banks like the real estate, the industrial, agricultural, and social development funds and the tourist funds, which was recently established. The objective is that the financing of these funds for the private sector and its investments has the National Investment Fund has improved its legalization in order to provide more liquidity in these funds and banks in order to support the investments of the private sector. We will continue in the same route. Also, the PIF as a cornerstone of the economic development of the kingdom. It will continue its investments. We witnessed a few weeks ago the statement by the Crown Prince, and who is the chairman of the PIF, who is very keen on its success to play its role effectively in the diversification of the economy. It is going to inject more investments in addition to its investments this year and next year and the next following years. And we expect hundreds of billions to be injected in terms of investment through the PIF in order to support the national economy and the nationalization of industries and the national content, more employments, more opportunities for the private sector and entrepreneurship. We developed the procurement systems in the government agencies, and I can speak particularly, in order to save time, the national content and the nationalization of industry, which is an important element. We have created the authority of the national content in order to support the national content and to develop the local industries in the government and non-government sectors that played a great role. We have achieved great achievement through this new system of signing real estate contracts and in government procurement operations. Again, supporting the social security remains a top priority in the economy. The latest was the issuance of the Ministerial Council last month of the new social security system that develops the social security system and government financing, which is a cornerstone there. The objective is to protect the most needy in order to allow them to enter the labor market and to not to deprive them from any support. We will continue to support them. Still employed at the same time. We will continue in this direction. Regarding our financial estimations, as mentioned just previously by the custodian of the two holy mosques, the head of the Council of Ministers, he approved the budget. The expected revenues for next year will be 948 billion. Expenditure will be 990 billion, and to remind you, this figure was previously announced like this time last year before the pandemic, which is the plan which we have not changed in order to deal with the shock. But we return again to the same program which we announced, which we launched previously, which is the financial sustainability and supporting financial sustainability at the medium range. The deficit we expect to be 141 billion, which is about 4.9% of the total GDP. And we were able to, contain the deficit from 17 to 12 to 9 to 5%, we can, inshallah, reduce that from 12 to 5%, and then to put it down next year and from 3% to less than 1%, God willing, in 2023. Regarding the national debt, the percentage is going to increase from the GDP from 32.7% to next year, but it will stabilize at around this rate, and we will not exceed it, God willing, in the medium range. As for the other economic indices, we expect a recovery of the economy at the national level. We expect the growth to be for next year to be at 3.2%, and this is depending on the approved initiatives. We expect that this figure is going to be higher, of 13.2, when we announce more initiatives, including the initiatives of the PIF, which were not included here in this figure. We expect that in case of a faster recovery, we are going to announce these positive news about the, of course, thanks to the arrival of the vaccine, which will start and the vaccination campaign, which will start soon, which will also be accompanied by a quick recovery of the economy and accelerated recovery, which we hope is going to be higher than that. The following years, the growth is going to be higher, up to 3.4 and to 3.5 for the years 22-23, God willing. The inflation, as mentioned, is expected to stabilize at around 2%, supported by a healthy economic growth, as I have mentioned, in order to implement the initiatives of the Vision 2030, which were a cornerstone, God willing, and also in our capability in this homeland to face the crisis which was faced globally, where most global economies faltered. We saw a lot of deteriorations in numerous countries, some advanced countries, and thank God we did not witness any such in the private sector, in the health sector. We were able to deal with it effectively. Thank God we worked very efficiently. I would like to thank you, and I'm sorry for this prolonged statement, and I'm very happy now to take your questions. And let me start with the first question, please. Our colleagues in the Ministry of Health would like to pass on the microphones. Vivian, please. Good evening. Your Excellency, the Deputy Minister of Trade said there was going to be a revision of the VAT tax after the pandemic. However, you mentioned there's going to be no revision over the short and medium terms, that is about 3 years. We see a conflict of statements, so what can you tell us? Thank you so much. I would like to confirm what His Excellency, my brother and colleague, the Minister of Trade and the Acting Minister of Media, there is no conflict. The Kingdom had to take a very tough decision, but it was the most convenient in light of the current situation. The Kingdom, like any country in the world, revises its policies continuously, and then when we find that the circumstances are convenient, we are going to revise any decision taken. But as I have said previously, there is no plan now for the short term or the medium terms to revise the VAT tax. However, the government, to remind you, has taken decisions after the application of the VAT tax to alleviate the real estate tax, and has also taken on its burden the taxes of the first houses and increased that from up to 1 million. That means there's a dynamic government that is bearing in mind the needs of the citizens and to allow what is in their best interest that helps the citizens in general. Vivian, please. هل يمكن أن توضحوا أهداف أسعار Thank you, Vivian. She's asking about the revenues. Can we compare the oil and non-oil revenues in 2021 budget? And my comment is going to be very quick. The reason is for not having them there because the government is now, in light of Aramco, which is a public company, is dealing with Aramco as a taxpayer. There's a revenue and the tax coming and profits. As the government, the greatest or the biggest shareholder in the company. So the revenues is based on the revenues of tax revenues or non-tax revenues. and the distribution of revenues by the government in general. In the previous years, the Kingdom here is not speaking about the oil revenues. The Ministry of Finance, we don't speak about the oil. We are a major producer and influencer, and we can't make any predictions about the future oil prices. Assalamu alaikum, from Arab News. The private sector is facing an unfair treatment compared to the companies created by the PIF. How will this be dealt with in the future, and will this affect the offers given or the bids from the private sector? Thank you so much. This is a very key issue, and I would like to say clearly that the strategy of the Kingdom is very clear in supporting and empowering the private sector. We do not want in any way or shape or form to compete with the private sector, but we want to open up for the private sector to invest. But there are sectors, and over the long years, where the private sector was kind of hesitant to enter, not for any reason, but because of risks where the private sector cannot deal with, where the government is trying through the PIF and other tools to open up these horizons to deal with the risks in these new sectors where the private can enter. And to remind you, even in the investments that are taken by the government through the PIF, we are contracting suppliers and contractors from the private sector. Atallah Shammari from CNBC Arabia. Your Excellency, when we speak about expenditure, the pandemic has a great impact on something which is the revenues, but we would like to know further about the impact of the pandemic on expenditure and also issuing the financial dues of the private sector. We can see that they want to feel the support more effectively. Thank you so much. I think this is a very important question. From the pandemic, we learned a lot. And God willing, we were able to, by learning for what has been achieved over the past 4 or 5 years, over the Vision 2030, we were able to deal with this pandemic effectively. I'm going to give 2 examples in light of your question. First, that the investments in the infrastructure, in the digital infrastructure, enabled the government to deal very quickly, very swiftly with this pandemic. Enabled the government to take all the requests of the private sector, all their invoices, enabled the government to send people to work from home through the Atimad platform, enabled the employment of the ministry to revise and to study these requests and then do the transfer the amounts to the banks and to the companies. As I mentioned, I assure you that these figures are real and they are not manually calculated. They come from Atimad system. From the date we received these orders and to the transformation to about a huge percentage of these requests were paid and deposited in the accounts of the private sector organizations. Over 98% was paid over the past 45 days. Mostly are halted because of some legal issues, because of issues between the private and the public sector. Mohammed Al-Bishi, Al-Sharq. I remember in 2016 when I asked you personally about the guarantees given by the government in the economic reform that might reflect on the citizens. And now, with these reforms, is there any intention by the government to revise the security networks and social security networks, especially after the increase of the VAT and the inflation that is touching 5%? Thank you. It's a very sensitive question, in fact. and it's important to speak about it. The government interacted over the past few years, over the past 4 years, greatly, first doing government reforms within our own operations and revising a huge number of initiatives. And one of these is the Social Security initiatives. The focus was, instead of benefiting from the electricity subsidy and more affluent people. However, the affluent, those who have big houses, who make greater electricity and power consumptions, because the subsidy was given to everybody. The gasoline prices changed. This is one example. So when we reformed this system, and redirected this subsidy to the most needy groups of the citizens. When we look at what the government has done in terms of reforms in the financial sector, for example, and the alleviation of waste and raising the efficiency of expenditure, that came very positively in light of this pandemic, where the expenditures fell down, the oil revenues fell down by 50%. So had it not been for the initiatives that over the past years were taken, as I mentioned, 4 years ago, when we increased the non-oil revenues, including the VAT, we were not going to be able to pay salaries and other. Let's remember that the government eventually is after these initiatives and policies in order to increase the services given to the citizens and in order to reach a strength zone to deal with such a global pandemic that we had to deal with the oil prices fluctuations. We had to deal with that. Therefore, our aim is to reform the social security system, and lately the new system of social security which was issued. And let's remember that over the past system, someone who started to work would stop receiving that, and we believed that that may not have been good, even though it seemed to be right in the beginning. However, the objective is to encourage people to work. So if someone worked even with a low salary, then the government, if he needs, then the government has to pay him in minimum to help them make it. So we increase the quality of life and people's dignity so that they can participate in building the country and the economy, and then we help them with this gap between their income and what they need. Abd Mohsen Hazam from Al Arabiya News Channel. You stated previously of a great uncertainty in the economy in light of COVID-19. What is the level of certainty which you are speaking about today? And do you expect to see changes in these estimations? Thanks be to Allah that when I spoke at the beginning of the crisis and halfway through it, I had to speak because we had a great responsibility to be very transparent. The challenge was unprecedented. The challenge was unknown. It was obscure, and everybody in the world was struggling in order to glean through the dust. Advanced countries have collapsed in their health sectors. Advanced countries, people were fighting to buy their food requirements, such as bread and water. And thanks to Allah, because of our ability and our swiftness and taking tough decisions and necessary decisions and firmness, we were able to handle this situation, and we emerged successful. We were able to enhance our health sector. We were able to support our economic activity, and we can see a very strong recovery of the most economic activities over the past quarters. We've seen data and indices issued by the central bank in Saudi Arabia and the statistics authority that speak of a return and a good recovery of the economy. We expect next year to see of a 3.2 or over that 3.2 growth rate, which is going to increase. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad Al Mahmoud from Sky News Arabia. Your Excellency, there was talk previously about privatization of some sectors in the government. What is new in this arena, and in particular in the public sectors such as health, education, and what is the impact of the privatization on citizens? Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, and I think that's a very worthy question. To remind you, what is the aim of privatization? Privatization has a number of objectives or aims, mainly to increase the quality of service provided. We know that the private sector can provide a more efficient service with lower costs. Secondly, is to provide opportunities for investment for the private sector, and it is extremely important to remember that one of the key objectives of Vision 2030 is to increase the participation of the private sector. Third, and this is the most important, is reducing the cost for the government so that it doesn't have to look for newer revenues. So our aim of the strategy in privatization is increasing the efficiency of expenditure, participation of the private sector, and increasing the quality of services. Despite the pandemic and the very tough year of 2020, we were able to witness strong contracts and through the privatization program, either in education, health, or in the desalination or the grey water treatment. The investments of the private sector there are 15 billion, and God willing, as mentioned previously, we're going to witness more investments, double these investments or more in 2021, which will also increase in the following years. Thank you, Mohammed Al-Amin from Arqam website. My question is, can we interpret the sign given by the Crown Prince of improving the income of the citizen, and what are the plans of the ministry here? Thank you. Of course, we don't need to remind that the custodian of the two holy mosques and the Crown Prince are keen, very first and foremost, on the citizens, and to provide for the citizen the services that they deserve, to improve their income, to enhance the economic foundation by creating more employments and investments, and to solidify this foundation for entrepreneurs, of young entrepreneurs who have opportunities and the ability to invest to increase their income. God willing, when the top priorities are achieved, which are the increasing the government revenues, of the objectives of the housing programs and other programs, of course the income is going to improve for sure. It is in the heart of the interest of the leadership and the government in general, and it's only a matter of time. Assalamu alaikum. From Al-Qisadiyya. At the outset of Corona, the government stopped the employment at the government sector for 2020. Is this halt going to continue for 2021, bearing in mind the unemployment index? Thank you for the question. Governments in 2020 faced an unprecedented crisis, especially in relation to employment. We saw big countries, top countries in G20, where the unemployment hit high rates up to 20%, sometimes 15-20%. The kingdom is not an exception. The economic lockdown, because of the health precautionary measures, and that led to increasing the unemployment, but it was minor compared to other countries. However, thank God, we have seen a recovery in the economy positively, where employment returned. And I can give you one example. The industrial sector, for example, lost some jobs during the lockdown, but it regained them in the second and the third quarter. And in the number of jobs for Saudis in the industrial sector increased compared to prior or before the pandemic. We continue in the government to employ, but very cautiously. We only take the very important and very necessary jobs. We would like to continue to give employments, but only as needed. We want to enhance the economic foundations and the opportunities of employment and investments for entrepreneurship, so that instead of finding a job with a salary, to start a project. To provide jobs for the economy is one of our objectives for the labor market. Thank you. Izdihar Allah from Al-Ikhbariya. We would like to congratulate you on this budget and your efforts, your commendable efforts in this context. The preparations of the labor market and the Saudi, Your Excellency, for the labor market can greatly affect the labor market, especially after the approval of the new labor law and the contractual relation between the employers and the employees. Will that, in your opinion, impact the expenses or the financial the initiatives in the labor market come according to a strategy recently approved by the Strategic Committee headed by the Crown Prince. That includes a great number of initiatives. The Labor Ministry launched some of these, including the reform of the contractual relation in the labor market, the aim of which is to improve the labor market, to enhance the productivity in the labor market, and in particular the private sector and the efficiency of the private sector, and also, which is also on top of our priorities, giving more opportunities for the citizens to compete in the labor market in the private sector. I expect, God willing, to witness a great improvement in the labor market and to witness more employment opportunities opening up with rewarding salaries and packages. And let's take this as the final question, as we're running out of time. Good evening, Saleh Hazaid from Al-Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper. My question is, what are the direct impact on the citizens for the increase of inflation, and what is the way out? Thank you. As mentioned before, and remind you again, we will close this year with an inflation of 3.7%. However, this inflation is going to return to its normal standard of 2% over the next 2 years. In general, the government supports the economy and the citizen with all its might. We provide services of high quality in the health sector, in the education sector, and we seek with all our ability to create employment opportunities and investment opportunities for the citizens to improve their income and to deal with some outside shocks such as we have been dealing with this year during the pandemic. Thank you very much. And at the end, I would like to thank you. And I will never forget to thank everybody who worked in the health sector, to whom we owe greatly during this pandemic. They did not only sacrifice their time and efforts, they sacrificed their lives. We are duly indebted to them, and I would like to thank again our security personnel and the employees in the private and the public sector who worked exceptionally effectively during this pandemic, to work at a distance without any break in the services provided by the government. I would like to thank in particular, and repeat that again, our soldiers in the Southern Front. Thank them. May Allah protect them and guide them and give them victory. We pray for you day and night, and to them we pray all the time for victory and safety of this homeland and the sacrifices which they give. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again.